welcome to Nancy's Notions Wardrobe Builder. I'm Joy Mahone, and we are rolling right along in our year of expanding our wardrobe. Now, in our March edition, we covered the trouser pant and kind of all things pants, understanding the order of assembly, how to make a fly front, and things like that. Well, we're continuing our study of pants, but today we are going to be covering a wardrobe staple and a fashion item, the jeans pattern, using the Morgan jean pattern. And this is a great pattern because it really is a slimline fit, so it's really representative of what our body shapes look like. You can always change the fit in your fit sample as far as how snug the legs are and the contour and some of those stylized parts of the pattern. But jeans can be a really satisfying item to make in your wardrobe, and if you have never made one before, it's a great opportunity to tackle denim fabrics. And we're gonna learn a lot. We're gonna have fun kind of jumping around, referencing some different lessons and resources, and really a well-rounded approach to sewing jeans. Now, jeans really are just a modified pair of pants. The goal in sewing a pair of jeans is really mastering or understanding what sewing methodology that we use and how we modify that to accommodate the denim fabric, which can be a little heavy. So we have a hammer, which we'll show you how to use that. And then really just how we modify those skills to enhance or spotlight the denim fabric, the top stitching, things like the fly front, and those characteristics that really are unique to the pair of jeans. Well, before we begin sewing, let's talk a little bit about the history of jeans. You may know that Levi Strauss & Company constructed the first pair of Levi's denim or jeans overalls in 1850. But let's take a little more look at the history of denim and jeans and see how this has impacted how we use it today. In 1567, the term jeans is given to the cotton twill trousers worn by merchant sailors from the Italian coastal city of Genoa. Now in 1850, Levi Strauss & Company constructed their first pair of Levi's overalls. And this was created using an unsold supply of material that were actually intended for some tints. Now in 1860, Levi Strauss adds a new fabric called denim. In 1878, the first indigo dye is invented and used. Now, in 1890, Levi assigns a lot number of 501 to a pair of pants that has the original button fly, the shrink-to-fit trouser with the patented copper rivets. Did you know that today it takes 45 steps to go into constructing an authentic pair of 501 jeans? In 1905, Levi adds the watch pocket and the second back pocket. Then in 1922, belt loops become standard, replacing the normally worn suspenders. Now in 1927, the introduction of the zipper to the bib overall was a big change. And in 1938, ladies' Levi's launched. In 1945, jeans were introduced in Europe. And finally, in 1947, Wranglers came onto the market. In 1950, teens really embraced jeans as the Elvis and the Jimmy Dean look influenced society. In 1964, the broken twill version of denim was introduced into the market, eliminating or reducing the common issue of twist that once occurred. In 1977, Calvin Klein launched the first fashionable pair of jeans, and in 1970, the stone-washed look was introduced into the market. The fashion jean that once was a utilitarian garment has far surpassed fad status and secured its place in our fashion history, and I'm sure fashion history to come. Well into the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, the home sewer has the ability now to create denim jeans of their own with materials that look store-bought and all the functions and tools available to really create that custom pair of jeans. Notions needed to complete the Morgan jeans pattern include jeans buttons or a decorative button of your choice, top stitching thread and regular thread, a 1/4 yard of fusible interfacing, denim sewing needles, a marking tool. A hammer is going to be a great tool to use in relaxing the thickness of the denim when you get to some of the seams. Denim rivets, which are decorative and optional, and an optional leather patch for the back of the waistband. Let's talk fitting the jeans pattern and the pair of pants. So we know that a pair of jeans is really just a modified pair of pants. And just like a trouser, we want to make a fit sample. Now, I suggest that you make your fit sample for your jeans out of a denim material rather than a cotton muslin, so that your fit sample is just that much closer to how you want your final pair of jeans to fit your body. Now, I want to share a little story with you. When I was in high school, I worked for a tailor, and we did all kinds of garments and a lot of denim. And a lot of people would come in and they would want us to taper or contour the lower leg of their jeans from like the knee down to the hem. And what would happen is that if you had a really full pair of jeans and you started to take it in on the side seams, you would start to get a little bit of twist going on in the pant leg. And you will probably see a lot of blog posts and a lot of information out there stating that denim is the cause for the twist in a pant leg in jeans. And that's, unless you're working with a very poor quality denim, that's not the case. It's not the weave or the twill of the pant, it's that the pant leg is unbalanced. And for some reason in jeans, that just shows up a little more. So when you're making your fit sample, you can unpin from or unbaste from the hem up to the knee and maybe let out a little on one side or take in maybe just the front or just the back, and really balance that leg so that the grain of the pant pattern hangs beautifully. If you need to redraw that grain on your pant leg, do that, so when you cut it out of your fashion fabric, you will have the perfect grain and you're not going to have any of that common leg twist. And that will also allow you to take in or let out those side seams again without having the twist. Well, to complete my story, when I was in college, I was in one of my professor's offices, and she worked with all these manufacturers, big name brand, name label ones. I could tell you the names and you would absolutely recognize them. Well, I was in her office and she got a phone call that day, and it was a big name manufacturer, and they were having an issue with people buying jeans in their online catalog and returning them, to the point that it was a problem. So they were consulting with her. And I don't know why, but she started telling me about this, and I actually kind of said, I know how to fix that. It was a really cool opportunity because I had seen that because we had worked with so many pant legs, and the deal was that it was an imbalanced pattern from the front of the pant leg to the back. And so making that fit sample is going to allow you to adjust the pant leg to your desired contour and silhouette, and you're going to be able to eliminate any of that twist that for some reason just shows up a little more in jeans. Well, I was able to pass that information along, and I don't know whatever happened to it, but it was just really neat that, wow, here I am, little fashion design student, and I had a solution for an industry problem. So you guys have a solution as well, and it will make your fitting just that much easier. All right, one more thing that I want to share with you because it's pretty fun. So part of sewing and studying fashion design is that we had to make a pair of jeans in an industrial lab. And one of the very first projects that I did in college was a knockoff. We were thrown basically a pair of jeans and we were told, take it apart, make a pattern, and then reassemble them in the industrial lab. And I found them and still have them. So this pair of jeans was actually the first ones that I ever made. I did them industry, true to type as far as the machines. If you look at them on the inside, they look store-bought. And the moral of the story is your jeans that you make from your pattern, whatever you're using, we'll be using the Morgan pattern, can look store-bought as well. All right, well, let's jump into making our Morgan jeans. For pattern layout based on the width of your fabric, make sure you reference your pattern guide. Now, it's often recommended when working with a denim fabric to cut in a single layer. Now, the width of fabric that I have is a moderate or medium weight, so I do have this folded. None of the pieces are cut on the fold, but if you're working with a denim that is quite heavy, then a single layer is going to be key. One thing with sewing a pair of jeans, especially if you're doing some of the specialty edges such as a flat felled edge, is that accuracy and having a real precision shaped piece. That's really going to make a difference. Now we can go ahead and serge our edges when we're sewing this, do a flat felled seam, which we'll visit later. We're using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance around the edge of the pattern, but just know that some of that will be trimmed away. All right, well, let's get all of our pieces cut out, and then we're going to move right along in making this exciting and really fun pair of pants. I cut the larger pieces first, and then I was able to use quite a lot of remnant space around the larger pieces to cut the smaller pockets and pieces such as that. So I still have a great cut of fabric left over. Probably could make an additional pair of pants. I want to point out that because denim is a pretty stable fabric, I didn't have to use a ton of pins. The fabric and the patterns just kind of stayed there, so you probably noticed that I kind of went around and on a couple pieces, I just held them with my hand. Make sure you use really sharp shears or scissors. That's also going to be a key for really getting some precise cuts. All right, well, let's head over to the sewing table. Let's talk sewing denim. Based on the weight, finish, and overall thickness of the fabric that you have selected will determine if you have a few specialty things that you need to do in the process of sewing. You'll see I have a hammer here, and no, this isn't because you might get frustrated and hit your machine or your fabric. But this is a tip that I know a lot of people use it, and I encountered it, as I mentioned in our intro, when I was in high school working on denim. We would shorten a lot of jeans, which is just basically a rolled hem. Now you'll see in this turned under edge right here, there's already 3 layers of thickness. We have the main layer, I have the first turn under, and then I have a second turn under. So there's 3 layers right here, which is doable for going through a machine. But as you layer that upon another corresponding piece of the fabric, you may have 6 layers of denim, which gets very thick. So that's where our handy dandy hammer comes in, and it's really easy. Now, I'm not going to hit this very hard because I don't want to break my tabletop, but go to a hard surface, your floor. If you have a landscape brick, that works really well. And wherever the fabric is thick, such as on the hemline where the side seam intersects, you want to take your hammer and hit really, really hard and pound the seam about an inch or so on either side and just hit it really hard, you will see that the fibers start to relax and soften. And I'm not kidding. Sometimes you have to pound it really hard and do that several times. So if you're not real strong, find someone with some muscles who can do that for you. But the nice thing about that is that it will soften the fibers so that it's a little bit easier for sewing. It actually makes a big difference. The other thing is this little plastic tool right here, and it's see-through, so it may be a little tricky for you to see, but this is the big jig, or you probably have like a Denim jig. And what happens is when you have a thick area, and I just have a little sample here that's already stitched, but when you're sewing under your machine and it starts to not be level, here I'm holding the presser foot level, but if I tilt it back, that often is what happens when you are coming up to one of those thick areas of sewing. And so this little Denim jig is a great tool because you can lift your presser foot and you can slide this underneath on top of your area that you're sewing. And then now what it's going to do is it's going to allow you to sew. And there's the hole in the middle, so it's going to stitch. And then when you get to the point where you're over the hump, then you can lift your presser foot and remove the big jig or Denim jig. We always called it a hump jumper because it would jump over the humps of the fabric. But great tool in your denim sewing arsenal. So check that out. Some machines have a little button called a leveling button. It kind of does the same thing as the Denim jig, but the nice thing is that the Denim jig, and some people put cardboard under there, I've seen that, but the nice thing is that your whole presser foot can rest on this tool. Whereas when you use the leveling button, you kind of have to hold it if it doesn't stick. And so this just kind of helps aid in that particular technique. Okay, well, let's talk about top stitching. I love top stitching denim, and you can do so many things. There are just wonderful colors available. Now here we have our pocket pieces, and what we're gonna do is I'm gonna flip this over as if I'm sticking the pocket on a pair of pants. Now, because this is a pocket, we're gonna top stitch across this edge, and we don't want that to be attached to anything else because it's a pocket. We're going to utilize it exactly as a pocket. So we're going to use this as our example. And when you are top stitching, we're going to use the formula. We've encountered this in Wardrobe Builder. So the thing is, you want to look at how long you want your stitches. You want to figure out what thread you are using. If you're using a true top stitching thread, it's a little thicker, a little heavier. And so you might want a slightly longer stitch to compensate for the heavier thread. So experiment on a sample. The pocket is a great example because you can experiment on a small amount of fabric. Your needle. Key that you have a denim needle in here, a jeans needle. It's a much heavy, durable needle. If you don't use a jeans needle, you will break a lot of needles, I promise. And then just practice. I have a regular foot on here. Some people will use some other feet based on your preferences, but just practice. I love using the edge of my sewing machine and the edge of the presser foot and then the markings on here. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna stitch a single row of top stitching across the top edge of the pocket, and it looks really, really nice. I love the contrast of that kind of true denim top stitching thread. It's like a burnt orange. It's just a great color. Now you can do 1 row, 2 row, 3 rows, whatever you want. Use a decorative stitch, but the idea is that your first row anchors the folded edge of the fabric or anchors the main pattern piece or the pocket to the garment. All right, well, let's do an additional row of stitching, and you can space those out to your preference. And I will be turning under the outer edges of the the pocket. So I didn't worry about back stitching here. I think I'm gonna put 3 rows in here. All right, and then I'll make another one. Whoops, I ran out of thread there. Let's do that again. There we go. All right. So here we have 3 rows of stitching. You can go in and monogram, put your own name on there, initial, whatever. All right, so we have this ready. The last thing about sewing jeans that I want to talk about is the bar tack. Now, the bar tack is used in several areas and it's utilitarian. It's not meant to be pretty, although you can make it pretty, but you'll see it on areas like the front fly where you have heavy back stitching, and it really just is to anchor the fabric, because what happens is when you have a bar tack, then you can't, if the edge of the fabric rubs up against something, it's not gonna just tear off. So check out the bar tack. We're gonna go ahead and repeat our top stitching across the top edge of our pocket pieces, and we'll move on. Once you have the top edge of your pockets top stitched, you are going to want to turn under the outer edge of the back pocket 1/2 inch, and then on the coin pocket, you're only going to turn under the 2 sides, because this will be on the inside of the pocket facing. Now here's a little trick that I have for you. If you want to take some oak tag or cardboard and trace the pocket piece but remove the seam allowance, you can use that as a template or a guide. So you can line the edges of the seam allowance up and then press under. And then I like to use my clapper to really remove the heat. And then you can walk all the way around the edge of the pattern and get a nice, perfectly shaped pocket point. And then we'll do that at both sides for the additional pocket. Now on these, we're gonna be attaching these to the back of the pant shortly, so I don't need to go around those anymore. But on the coin pocket, we can actually place this on the pocket facing, and there's just a scant curved edge right here that matches our curved edge of the pocket facing. We're gonna take this to the machine and do 1, 2, or 3 rows of top stitching. Remember, start on the edge to anchor and then move to the inside. You're going to do that on both edges, and then we're going to put a serged edge right around this contour. This will be hidden in the body of the pant. Lastly, now's the time to make your belt loop. And I cut my belt loop along the selvage edge. You can see that nice finished edge here. I just trimmed off the frayed part, but you can do your belt loop just like we did in our March trouser pant. So we're gonna fold one edge in and then the selvage as well. So then we've got a nice edge that will not fray. I'll take that to my machine and run some top stitching on that. So the preparation of all these little pieces is going to help so that the rest of our pant assembly runs smoothly. All right, well, our pocket pieces have been prepped. We are going to assemble the pocket bag. It's similar, but slightly different than the regular trouser pant. Now, we've already put an edge finish around the pocket facing, and I have the wrong sides together. So this is our pocket. The fun print is on the opposite side, or the right side of the fabric. This is the wrong side, and this is the wrong side of the pocket facing. So they are meshed next to each other. Now all we're gonna do is just stitch all the way around this. You can use your temporary spray adhesive to hold this, but since we're using denim and cotton, it's your comfort level, but it's really, you don't even really need to pin. Okay, let's go across the top. All right, now I'm gonna set this aside, and the next thing that we wanna do It's an easy step, but the instructions make it look just a little tricky. I know the right and wrong side can be a little difficult for some people. So here we have the pocket piece that has the decorative coin pocket. All right, and if you read the instructions, it will say that the side of the facing or the lining with the facing should be facing down. So I'm going to flip that over so it's down. Now the pretty side of the pocket we can see, but what we are going to do is we are going to line up the curved edge with the curved edge of the lining, and then we're going to stitch. I encourage you, you don't have to sew as fast as I do. It just takes a little time and practice, but a lot of your assembly on this, again, you really aren't going to need a lot of pins, so that makes your sewing just a little more streamlined. Okay, we are going to clip this curved area. Doesn't really need to be trimmed down, although you certainly could if you wanted. And then what we are going to do is we are going to press the seam allowance toward the pocket bag. All right, we're going to go all around that curve with our iron, and then we're going to flip that to the inside. Now I will need to iron it, so this isn't going to lay really, really nice and flat just yet. But what we will do is once that's turned to the inside, we can top stitch across that edge. Then we are going to be folding this in half so that we will have access to the pocket bag. So this, again, key area, if you don't press, it will look like this, which is kind of sloppy and really not necessary. So clip and press so that this will lay nice and flat. We're going to go over to the iron, or I'm going to press that and then top stitch it, and we'll move on to the next step. All right, once we have this edge beautifully stitched and turned under on the wrong side of your fabric, what we're going to do is we're going to fold this pocket bag in half. So you'll see if you're using a contrasting or a decorative fabric, then this is what you would see on the inside of your pant. All right, now what we want to do is we want to stitch across the bottom of this. It can be a serge. It can also be a French seam, which is where the seam line is encased. So if that were the case, then we would do wrong sides together and then trim and then do right sides. But since we have a serger, I am just going to fold that in half, take this edge to my serger, stitch across there, and then I'm going to turn this over, and we are going to stitch up and down to catch the pocket bag on the side seam, and then we're going to stitch across the top. And what a beautiful, beautiful pocket that we have. You can go in at this point and put a little rivet or a grommet here if you would like for decoration, or if there's anything decorative that you want to put, now is a great time to do that. Avoid having it right up across the top edge, because that is where you are going to stitch the waistband, and you're going to need access for your presser foot. But if you wanted to do a decorative rivet, now is a great time to apply that. Looks great. Well, the next step in our pant is to address, you might have guessed it, the fly front. And if you're following along in Wardrobe Builder, you might be an expert at that, because we featured the fly front in our March trouser pant episode. So I'm going to stitch the fly front. We'll kind of speed through that here, but if you want specific step outs on that, reference the March Wardrobe Builder. Well, our fly extension went very well. You'll notice with a button fly front, it's a little bit more simplified because we're not including the zipper in there, but it went really, really well. We are ready to delve into the back leg assembly of our jeans, which actually goes really pretty slick as well. We're gonna attach the yoke, and I like to lay out my pattern pieces before I actually pin them together, just so that I make sure the right pattern piece is angling and going to the right area. So we'll lay this up. I know that I have a little double notch clipped here. It's real tiny, you won't be able to see it, but it also corresponds to the double notch on the yoke. Now, we've talked a little bit about flat felled seams, and this is a great place to incorporate that. In order to do a flat felled seam, instead of laying right sides together and stitching this, and then we would serge across there, press the seam allowance down, and then we can top stitch across. To do the flat felled seam, the results are kind of gonna look the same, but we're gonna do wrong sides together. So I am going to lay this wrong sides together, and there is a little bit of bias that goes on this angle, so our fabric will ease nicely. That's really helpful on a denim that is exceptionally heavy. This one's a medium weight, but some of the real heavy unfinished denim fabrics, any little bit of give is quite helpful. Now I'm doing the normal 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Nothing different quite yet. Okay, so now that we have this 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we know that we don't want the seam allowance on the outside of the garment. So we are going to trim down one side of the seam allowance to about 1/4 of an inch. Now, at this point, I would have actually pressed that, so I would go in and just press. But since I'm illustrating, I'm just gonna skip that. But we'll trim some of that off, and then we can go ahead and press our seam allowance. And I'm gonna turn this here. The next thing is, depending on how confident and comfortable you are with sewing, you can literally just turn this edge under and press it, and then what you're gonna do is turn it again, and then you now have the flat felled seam. Now, this particular type of seam you see more on the side seam of a garment, but you certainly could apply that on, well, really anywhere. It's a choice. So I'm gonna run to the iron and press this because it is going to stitch more even if we do it in that regards. The one other thing that I wanna share is when we turn it, the original stitching of the seam allowance is also going to act as our decorative stitching. So right now, if you're looking at it, you're gonna say, oh, but we can see the row of stitching, and that's okay. By the time we iron and press this and flip it under, then we're gonna line up our other row of stitching, and it's going to emulate that double row of top stitching. The key here is that everything is pressed nicely and nice and even, so that when you do that second row of top stitching, it's, as I said, nice and even. So let's go press this, come back and finish this off. All right, well, that pressed beautifully. We are going to add our row of top stitching. Grab my other side. I'm just going to continue right into the other side. Beautiful. That's great. Very beautiful. Okay, so now we've got a flat felled seam there. We are going to attach our pockets. And I have a reference line. I would recommend pinning the center back seam of your pants together or basting them, and at least laying the back pieces against your body to make sure you have the best placement for your pocket. Too far apart can be really widening. Too narrow can look a little odd as well. So a nice placement, and of course, whatever angle. Now we have a yoke here that has a little bit of an angle to it. So having the top of the pocket run parallel is a little aesthetically pleasing. So I'm gonna go with that for my sample. Here we've got a little bit of our temporary spray adhesive. I use that all the time on pockets, so I really don't have to do a ton of pinning. However, we've got this beautiful edge folded under, and I do like to put a couple pins at either corner. I just don't want that to shift or the edge that's turned under to kind of roll. So that just helps to stay in place. The last thing that I want to share, we're going to top stitch this, of course. We've covered that already, so we're going to go all the way around once, maybe twice or 3 times, whatever you choose. Pick a decorative stitch, but make sure you add a really great bar tack on either side. So if our hand is in our pocket, we'll have a bar tack on either side. What that is a really heavy back stitch. Although one thing that I learned way back when I was in 4-H and a young student, and my 4-H leader took me to a lady who was a professional seamstress, and she taught me to sew a little triangle at the top. It's just a little more durable, and so basically you start at the edge, you angle to the inside of the pocket, straight across, back down. So that's actually how I start. So angle to the inside of the pocket, across the top, down, and all the way around the pocket. That triangle is just a great buffer for basically anchoring the pocket, and it looks really nice and sharp as well. I know whenever I had 4-H projects judged, the judges really liked that. All right, well, let's top stitch this, and then we're gonna stitch the center back seam, and we'll be ready to jump into the waistband, and really our jeans go together really pretty easy. All right, the next step in our pants is to stitch the center back seam. Now this will be the first part in our jeans where we are now going to overlap a seam that potentially could have thickness to it, and that is on the back yoke. Now what will be very important on this, because the yoke does come to a little bit of a peak, what's going to be important is that we line where these seam lines intersect up exactly. So what we are going to do is place them right sides together, and we are going to use one of our pins, and somewhere I have some T-pins, which is how I learned when I worked in a tailor shop. We used T-pins, which have like the little metal T. I'm out of those, but what we would use those for is this exact area right here, the center back intersecting seam on a pair of trousers. So if you run your pin perpendicular to the seam line, lining up the intersection, you can kind of fold one edge back, and it's going to be real hard to see on camera, but you can do this in your studio, but make sure that they intersect. Now if you want, you can baste first just to make sure that everything lined up. I feel pretty confident, so I'm going to go ahead and just stitch my regular seam line. Now, because this is going to be an area that has a little thickness, it might be a great time to insert our little Gina-majig tool. So as we come to that, we can lift the back presser foot and install or insert this underneath. And what that will allow the presser foot to do is to stay nice and level. So we're going to use that as we go over top of our first heavier seam. I'm going to go nice and slow. I do have that pin under there, so I want to make sure I don't hit the pin. Now I can lift the presser foot up and remove that tool as needed and continue with the seam. we remember that we want to make sure this is the first area where we really, really need that heavy denim or jeans needle in there. Now, some brands of jeans will have a flat felled seam on the back. The flat felled seam really is a very, very durable and sturdy seam for areas that tend to be really thick. I have a medium weight denim here, so I'm comfortable doing a regular seam. I'm going to serge this next. But again, if you have a denim that's real thick, then a flat felled seam will be a great tool. All right, let's see, and that looks beautiful. Now we do want to remember that there is a little bit of and these match up perfectly, but due to the fact that there is going to be a bump there on some heavier weight denims, there might be a just ever so slight discrepancy on where they come to a peak due to the nature of that seam. So pay attention to that. I'm going to pull this a little taut here because I haven't pressed it, but if we look real close, we'll see that that looks beautiful. All right, very good. So putting that pin in there just really helps angle those, especially since this comes to a peak. That would be one thing that we would notice very quickly on somebody wearing their jeans that they didn't match up. But this looks amazing. So we are going to serge, and then we're going to come back to the machine, and then we're going to put a row of top stitching down there. And then we are ready to assemble the rest of our pants, join the front to the back, and finish the waistband. So we're getting closer to having that custom pair of jeans. All right, this is a really fun part in making any project. It's when you have components done and you're ready to join them together because you know you're that much closer to your garment being put together. Okay, so I want to comment on a few steps that are coming up next when we join the front to the back. It's really pretty straightforward, but you have a few options that I want to point out. Because we're tackling denim and we're creating a pair of jeans, hopefully everyone knows, I'm sure you do, that there are all sorts of styles of jeans, where the top stitching is, where the flat felled seam is. And so you have some choices, and I just want to give you some options on the next step. So when you join the front to the back, and I just think jeans are really cool anyway. So you have a lot of opportunity right now to do embroidery, which we'll add, but we're just gonna kind of keep this kind of neutral as we do this portion so we can really see the steps. But we are going to lay right sides together, the front and back. I think the contrasting pocket bag is really fun. Now, the front leg of the pant typically is going to be a little more narrow than the back leg. And you can see that right here. If I just lay these on top, you'll see that there is definitely more width in the circumference around the leg on the back, okay, because the front is much smaller. And that's normal. Don't expect to lay these together and have them just match perfectly. So as you're laying, and this is really a good thing to recognize on a lot of garments, so that as you are making a three-dimensional garment, it isn't going to lay perfectly flat on the table. So it's usually the order that happens next is the crotch seam and then the side seam. It's just a little easier to tackle. However, you get to decide which seam you want to top stitch and or create a flat felled seam. A lot of jeans will have that flat felled seam on the inseam, and I don't know for sure, but I think that the thought process is then if you don't have it on the outseam, it's a little easier to take in, which is true, but if you've made a muslin, we're not gonna have to worry about that. However, there are a lot of decorative seams also running down the outseam of a lot of jeans. And if that's your desire, the look you're going for, then I would deviate from the pattern instructions and create a flat felled seam on the side, or do the double top stitching, triple top stitching, whatever decorative element that you want. Keep in mind that your pattern has you do the center seam first, and then when you do stitch the side seam together, your pattern then has you top stitch on the right side from the waistband down past the pocket. And that's twofold. It's to help anchor the pocket piece and then also keep that seam allowance angled toward the back. So we'll take a look at that in our sewing. That is, I'm going to sew it exactly like the pattern instructions instruct us to do. But again, just keep in mind you have some options. Now, the intersecting seam on the crotch curve is exactly like what happens on the yoke on the back. So I'm going to put a horizontal or a perpendicular pin to the seam allowance at that point, and then I'm going to line up the hem. Now, we also want to recognize that if I just put a little tension on here, the seams will match. The back length of the jeans and on most pants is slightly longer on the back to compensate for the buttocks and the curve and the spread when we sit. So matching the hemline with that crotch curve are the two areas that you want to match first. You can put a few pins running up the leg of the pant and then just use a little bit of stretch, and then that give will relax the part that you're going to ease in the pants. So it's really simple, but there's a little thought that goes into it based on how you want these pants to turn out. One last thing that I want to talk about here is that the pant twist. We've brought that up earlier, and it's a common thing that you hear in jeans, and I think it's important to understand that most traditionally that was an issue that happened in the fabric like pre-Levi Strauss days. So early on in twill fabrics, there was twists that happened in jeans or denim fabrics, but as the new broken twill weave was incorporated into making our jeans, that really isn't an issue as long as the leg is balanced. Now, balance doesn't mean they're the same width as we just covered. The balance means that when this pant leg hangs on your body, that the width of the front is what the width of your leg is, and then the width of the back is what the width of your back leg is. Now, that width might have some ease in it, but the proportion of that matches the proportion of your leg and hangs straight up and down. When that happens, then you can easily take in the side seam or take in the inseam without some of that twist that goes on. All right, some really great things to know, and we're really gonna have a great project here when we're done, and I know you will too. So let's head to the machine. We are going to stitch the inseam, stitch the side seam, turn it right side out. We're gonna top stitch down the side, again, according to the pattern, but you can change that if you want. And then we're gonna jump into the waistband. The waistband has some great diagrams in our pattern instructions. However, I do have students that sometimes have difficulty following diagrams, so I want to illustrate the pattern pieces here for you. We have the inner curve and then the outer curve for the waistband. And what we're going to do, I've got one that is not stitched and one that is, so I think this will illustrate nicely. The inner curve, which will be the one that goes around your the upper edge of the waistband. So the the deeper or the longer curve will be what is attached to the actual edge of the pants. All right, so what we want to do is we are going to stitch the inner curve with our 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm just going to illustrate this with a little bit of chalk mark here. Might not be real dark for you, but what I actually love to do, we've been using these magic pins a lot in our lessons. I've kind of fallen in love with them. And these are the extra long ones. And so the great thing is you have an extra long seam here that you do want to pin together. I'm comfortable a lot of times not putting pins in some areas, but the waistband is an area that it's really important that there's no shifting, because how everything looks in the end is based on your accuracy. So these really long pins, just weave it in and out one time. You need a couple and it anchors it together. It's a very ergonomically accurate for holding those together. Okay, so we've got that pin. We're going to go to our sewing machine and we're going to stitch across the seam line. Now, once we stitch across that, then the next thing we want to do is we want to trim some of the facing side, and you can pick a side at this point. So whichever side you trim is now the facing. Now I want to point out that I did not put interfacing on my waistband. I love a really pliable waistband. So there's some give. We're running into a lot of bias because there's a contour. So the grain, and actually I can see it if I look real close, the grain goes at an angle, about a 45-degree angle to our curve. So it's true bias. But if you want a more stable waistband, then this one of these pieces you are going to want to interface. And you can put a lighter weight interfacing, a couple layers of lighter weight interfacing, or you can put a single layer of some heavier, more stable interfacing. So based on how, again, you want that to fit, that will be how you choose the interfacing. Okay, and whichever one has the interfacing is automatically dictated as the facing. Okay, so let's take a look here. So this is our seam, and then what we've done is we've just graded the seam by trimming, about half of the seam allowance. It just removes some of the thickness because we are going to be top stitching. So that's this area right here. Then what I like to do is go and press this open. And the next thing our instructions have us do is on that same facing piece, we are going to stitch a 5/8 of an inch basting stitch. You can stitch that just inside the seam allowance if you don't want to go quite 5/8 of an inch. And the purpose there is just so that you have a guide for turning that edge under. And you'll see here that basically we've got the raw main pattern edge here, and then we have the facing piece right here. And you probably can start to see this form. Once this is attached, this raw edge here will be pinning to the waist shortly. So once it's attached and we fold this in half, all right, that's the inside of the garment. And what will happen is this edge will be stitched down. So then with our pants in between there, we bring those edges together and we top stitch it together. So what we're doing here is we are forming the waistband prior to assembling it to the garment, whereas in trousers and a lot of other pants, you stitch one piece to the pant, then you stitch the other piece. So not right or wrong, really you can do them either way. So let's go ahead and grab our pant, and starting at the back, we are going to line up the raw edge of the main fabric piece, and we know that because it's not the facing that we've already treated. And one little thing that I like to do first is turn my pants right side out. But when I'm cutting a waistband, and typically they're cut on the fold, boy, these look nice, but typically they're cut on the fold. And so you always usually have a little fold on the waistband piece. Let me see if I didn't press it out, but I use that as a reference. Yeah, perfect. A reference line for lining these up. Oh, so I'm using my chalk here. I just said because there's always little tricks and things we can share. I mentioned that this waistband with the top stitching is really all about accuracy. So you can certainly take a hem gauge and some chalk, and you can go around and measure the width of your band and make sure that it's the same. You can also do that, more importantly, on the main piece. And you certainly could put a row of top stitching, or not top stitching, but basting across here, and then use that basting line as what you stitch on when you attach them to the pants. And that's just another step that you can take for ensuring that you have just very precise placement and measurements. Okay, let's put that in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way around here. I'm going to pin this to the waistband, and it is a little bit longer. So once we get around to the front, this will be just a little longer than the front. That's not a problem. And then we're going to be able to finish this off. Okay, so I have flipped my waistband inside, and remember when we prepped our waistband facing, we already turned this edge under. It looks beautiful. See how nice that lines up, and then that's going to cover our seam allowance. But before we can top stitch and do that, we need to finish off the center front edge. So I'm going to open the waistband and I'm going to fold it back down in half, making sure that everything lines up, and I'm going to stitch across there. Then I can trim that, turn it inside. All right, and then we're going to pin and we'll top stitch around. So let's see what this looks like. we are at the most exciting or fun part of our project, and that is the finishing. This is really where you can make this project very unique to you by how you finish the hem, the buttons, and decorative elements that you apply. So pick and choose as you prefer. But a few of the elements that we can't bypass on include the belt loops. Now, in our March wardrobe builder episode, we talked about the trouser pant, and we spent quite a lot of time discussing how to add the belt loop to our pants. So I'm just gonna walk through placement on a pair of jeans. Now, ultimately, there are guidelines for belt loops, and if you're a belt wearer, then you might have certain preferences where you like them and don't like them. If they're too far apart, then your belt will wiggle around and sometimes rub against your skin. If you have too many, then it's kind of cumbersome. So use, a pair of pants that you have already as a guide. But typically on a pair of jeans, you will have a belt loop on the front, and it should sit just to the inside of the pocket placement, because if you remember, we have several layers of thickness here where the pocket top stitching is. There's that under pocket, and there's a chance that you might be including little metal rivets, and those little metal rivets usually intersect in that pocket area as well. You will want to stitch your belt loop on prior to adding any of the metal rivets, just so your presser foot can not run into the rivet, because that makes it a little tricky. But reference that 101 video. You can follow your pattern guide, but in general, we are going to place the belt loop down. We're going to stitch across it, and then we're going to fold that under. And jean belt loops for denim can be done a few different ways. Now, we did not attach them into the waistband. You can do that, but typically they're just top stitched on, folded and top stitched in a couple locations, which makes that really easy as well. So 2 belt loops on the front. Now let's flip this over. These are looking so great. On the back, we definitely want a belt loop in the center. Now, where do the other belt loops go on the back of the pant? Typically, there will be 2 belt loops on the back that are spaced equidistantly from the center back. We will have placed our pant pocket on the back of the pants earlier, kind of where it looks most aesthetically pleasing on our own body, so we can use that as a guide. I personally don't like my belt loop right in the middle of the pocket. I think it just creates an interesting line, but if people are looking that close, they probably aren't. But my rule of thumb is about 1/3 of the way in from the edge of the pocket, and then you can kind of see how I have those laid out here. But of course, customize that to your preferences. Okay, well, once we stitch our belt loops on, we need to hem our pants, or don't hem our pants. We have covered the narrow rolled hem in, I think, all of our wardrobe builder lessons so far. Our hoodie, we had a rolled hem, our dress, our Betty dress, and our trouser pants. So we're gonna create the same rolled hem, which really I associate with a pair of jeans to begin with. So we're gonna bring that narrow rolled hem, same technique of chalk marking it and then taking that to the machine. Now, some people like their jeans with the cut off look. And so these are our team member Audra's jean shorts, and they're so adorable. I think these were the first pair she's ever made, and she did an excellent job. And she had this really great kind of retro denim, and so with the shredded, just kind of raw edge, it looks really, really great. And so that's definitely, for some of you, you're gonna want that look. Other things that I've seen are a single row of top stitching above the frayed edge, just for decorative aesthetics. You can do a decorative row of stitching there as well. Pants, cuffs, which we won't have time to cover, but those are things that you can add too. So have fun with your length. All right, now the last thing that we want to point out is once we have those elements on there, let's take a look at the front. All right, so we are going to need some buttons to go in our button fly. So you can use actual sew-on buttons, or jeans or denim buttons are really easy to apply. So we'll take a look at that. We're going to mark those and put those buttons on there, and then of course the last button for the top of the pants. From there, we're done, other than maybe adding the little label on the back. And I've got some scrap leather, so I'm going to get out my little leather tools capsule and sign my autograph, and then I'm gonna put my leather patch on the back. So let's do some finishing and see our results. Okay, we are going to attach the buttons down the fly front of our jeans, and it's just going to make them look one step more professional. Now I want to point out that we have all this beautiful top stitching on here. We can go in yet and put some rivets in here wherever we would like, and on the inside of our jeans there's a lot of top stitching, back stitching, so this is definitely a garment that is very durable but also utilitarian. And so we have these heavy bar tacks, for example, that anchor the belt loops on there. So don't feel bad that you have some of that look on the inside of your garment. Again, it's kind of a utilitarian. I would rather them be secure, so if there's extra stitches or things like that, that's okay. All right, well, on the fly front here, I have gone through and marked. It's real faint. I took my marking pencil and put a little dot where each one of these buttons for the jeans are going to go. Now I have a really easy tip for you here. If you are like me, you open up your package that has these buttons in it, and then they have the little pin, and it's real tiny. It's the little pin that goes in the back of the pants and hooks to the button. But if you're like me, you spill them on the floor and you can't find them. So as you are using your hammer to attach these, the vibration might make them jiggle off the table. So find a little magnetic pin cushion or a little container to hold them so that they're not going all over the place. All right, well, I have a little tool called an awl, A-W-L. You can give it your all, but this is really great for poking holes in your fabric. Now test on a sample first, but this will just aid in being able to put the little back pin through the fabric. So I'm taking the awl and I'm putting it right where my marking for my button is, and I'm just pushing that all the way through the denim and almost through my finger. So be careful with that. They are sharp, but an awl is actually a really great tool in sewing for precision. I keep one by my sewing machine. I don't have to use it every day, but it is something that if you need a real fine point, it's a great tool. And then put the protective cap on it. Okay, well, it's really as simple as taking that little pin that goes on the back, and I'm gonna start up here at the top. You can work from the bottom up or the top down, doesn't really matter, but we'll poke that through. Okay, so you'll see that that little prong, I push it all the way through the fabric. Now I'm gonna take the button on the front and I'm gonna put that on the pin, and sometimes it depends on how tight the prong is. Sometimes you can push a little and it'll kind of anchor. This one's really, really tight, so I'm not really able to push that through with my hand. So what I wanna do is I wanna put this face down. And if you have a really hard surface, these are industrial tables, so I'm not gonna hurt it, but depending on if you're doing it on your dining room table, I would maybe get a brick or like a metal pan or something. Or what I'm doing here is I just have an excess scrap of fabric that I just have folded multiple times, and that way the decoration on the top will not impose itself on the front. Now, unlike relaxing the fibers where you can really beat the daylights out of it to relax the fibers, I like to kind of start a little slow on these to make sure that I like the placement. So it's definitely affixed to it, but it's not anchored all the way. There's still a little bit of a gap in there. And so I'm going to put this down, and then I can just hammer that all the way down. Once in a while, I will flip this over depending on the decoration, and I will finish tapping it from the top, making sure that I'm careful not to bend the top of this. But they're really secure. You don't have to beat it really hard because the thread or the treads on the inside of that rivet, once they're affixed, it's really, really durable. So I'm gonna go through, put the rest of them on there, but what a great look. I chose kind of a copper finish because this is a really muted denim. I just love the whole top stitching, kind of a great look. So let's go ahead, put the rest of those in there. The last thing you're gonna wanna do, and you are completely done, is you can then go in and do some rivets wherever you want. Put them on the side, a hip area. You see those quite common. We've mentioned earlier on the edges of the pockets on the back. Rivets can go in the same way. There are rivet tools, but you can just as easily use your hammer, use the awl, and then put the pieces through, and you are done. Joining me in this edition of Nancy's Notions Wardrobe Builder. I hope you have enjoyed learning how you can create your own custom fitted and custom jeans that look store-bought using a few modifications to some of our basic sewing techniques. Really, a custom fitted pair of jeans is just a modified trouser pant that I think any sewer can create, and it's a great addition to your wardrobe. Well, make sure you like and comment below. Let us know how your jeans are coming along. Make sure you like and subscribe so that you'll be notified anytime a new video is available. Well, we're not done yet. We're gonna have an additional Nancy's Notions 101 tips and trick video where we're going to delve a little deeper into some of our tips for sewing denim fabrics. Well, I'm not done. I have a few more fabrics that I'm going to take over to the sewing machine, create some more jeans and some great fabrics that are available on the Nancy's Notions website. So check that out for all of these fabrics in a variety of colors, weights and textures, and post your successes. We want to hear from you. We'll see you next time in Nancy's Notions Wardrobe Builder.